Just a quick unscheduled stop. I know many of you. The only downside of our parallel sessions format that we run here in the late morning is that there's so much that happens out of the site. You can't be everywhere at once. So I want to talk briefly about one which you can experience because Woods Bagot is right outside here during our Celebrate LA reception tonight and tomorrow, where Woods Bagot, the Australian architecture firm, has developed this great project, More LA. And so I spent my afternoon in their workshop and discussion looking at about how we can start to imagine how to transform Los Angeles parking, because one of the things we've talked about, whether it's seamless mobility and micro-mobility and all these advances is that there is an unknown and yet growing percentage of Los Angeles parking that is essentially no longer needed. And so how can we start to redevelop that? So we spent a fascinating afternoon, several hours, talking about, looking at sites in downtown Los Angeles, in Inglewood, and in East LA, thinking about what parking is available. They built machine learning models to identify the parking sites there, who uses them, who commutes to them, what can be removed just from basically surface private parking, so not even on street, not even built parking garages, but thinking about what could be reclaimed and how. And their rough estimate, and this, as a New Yorker, I felt like a total own, as they looked at only just enough to basically be the size of Manhattan, so 25.4 square miles of parking they reclaimed, and they could basically house 750,000 to 1.5 million new Los Angelinos. And as we sat there, listening to some of the lectures and listening to the designs, I moderated a panel over there with several smart folks on sort of thinking about the regulations of parking in Los Angeles. How do we start to unwind those? We had Donald Shoup, the master, the author of No Such Thing as Free Parking, thinking about, what happens if we could finally start to solve some of these regulations. And so they came up with, and I would encourage all of you to see this, thinking about, for downtown LA, what you can do for urban infill, taking those surface lots, taking alleyways and turning them into streets, reactivating sort of new plazas around dense multifamily housing. In East LA, they basically they took long strip parking along some of the big corridors and turned it into new boulevards with multiple uses. And then in Inglewood, reimagining the courtyard apartment, the bungalows that we think of as so iconically LA, in films like Mulholland Drive and Day of the Locust, which have not been able to be built in LA in 40 years or more. So thinking about how we can undo all this. And you're going to see the results. The Woods Bagot Pavilion out here has some of the results of what they came up with, and you're going to hear from them if you talk to them about what we sort of talked about in the workshop and from there. So I would encourage all of you to sort of see that activation and chat with them during the Celebrate LA. So with that, I want to start our final panel. I guess I'll turn it back to Heather here, who will introduce our final panelists, and we'll wrap up day one of LA CoMotion. Thank you, Heather.
Here we go, here we go. But before I do this, let me make sure they are in the building. Yes? Do we have all three? We have two. Okay. All right. It's ironic, isn't it, that it's hard to move human beings through Los Angeles from airports to here. But isn't that why we're here? I'm pretty sure that's why we're here. But these guys are going to talk about moving stuff. And I thought that is really appropriate, given that Black Friday is very soon, and we're going to need a lot of stuff. So here to talk about the future of the urban supply chain, getting stuff from here to there, Tom Madrecki from UPS. Come on up, sir. Here,
Thank you. And I know how excited everyone is to wait until the end of the day so we can delay you between drinks and now to talk about freight movement, which is clearly the sexiest of all topics that we could discuss late in the afternoon. But I'm joined today by Jay Walder, CEO of Virgin Hyperloop One. Jay, you've been on the job for all of a week.
Nope. 3 days.
3 days, all right. So I'm really anticipating that we can dive into the heart of the solutions that we're going to anticipate solving today. And then I know that Bastian, the CEO of Postmates, is running just a bit behind from LAX. He probably should have taken Hyperloop instead, so we could jump right into that. I think that I made a joke about just the popularity of urban freight in general. I don't think that anybody goes to planning school, for example, because they want to necessarily become an urban freight planner. Apologies if there's anybody in the room that did. But a lot of people want to work on bike ped infrastructure or the really cool TOD projects or things like that. And so freight sort of becomes the redheaded stepchild of the world, and goods movement generally becomes that. But it's something that's really essential to the places we call home, to quality of life, to Black Friday, and so I think that finding better ways of sort of managing the future demand that exists and the growing demand that exists, especially because of e-commerce, is essential to both just me receiving the Amazon orders that I place, but then also reducing miles traveled, having more sustainable systems, helping cities achieve Vision Zero, all sorts of things. So today, Jay, I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you're doing at Virgin Hyperloop One. But I'm just going to kick things off in the context of that and just think, why tubes?
Why tubes? Well, look, let me pick up on one thing you said, about freight, by the way. It's taken me a long time to get to freight as well. So I've spent most of my career doing passenger transport in New York, in London, in Hong Kong, and most recently doing bikes. So it's really been a change in terms of being able to think about it. It may be helpful actually for me just to mention what Hyperloop is, right? Because I think there's a lot of misconception about it. It may be helpful just to talk about it for a second. So, I literally, I'm not kidding about this, I joined the company, hey, hello? I'm momentarily speechless. No, welcome. No.
Bastion has that effect.
So I literally joined the company 3 days ago, so I'm sure I'm going to get everything wrong, and you guys will remind me of it and stuff like that. But, for a second, really imagine the first new form of transportation that we've had in over 100 years. Most everything that we've done in the 20th century was incremental, right? It was taking the model of railways or cars or planes, and we've made them better and faster and cheaper in terms of being able to do it, but we haven't really developed a wholly new form of transportation in doing this. What I love about Hyperloop is that it is that new form of transportation, and not just the fact that it goes fast, right? It'll be 670 miles an hour. It will be going through vacuum tubes so that it effectively, if you think about this, it's like being at the altitude of 200,000 feet to be able to do this. And by reducing that drag, it allows for not just quick travel, but really environmentally friendly travel. So now we're really talking about something that really does meet our values as we care about that more and more in being able to do it. I think the other thing that defines 21st century travel is that we want it to be on demand, right? The idea that the train runs on a schedule and you go when it goes feels a little bit outdated to us. That's not the way we do everything else in our life. So what are we talking about? Super fast, cheap to operate, environmentally friendly, on-demand transportation in a way that we've never imagined before. And so I think really what it's saying to us is, how do we imagine if we have this, when we have this, and we will have it, how do we imagine how that changes the paradigms that we've been used to? Whether it's connecting to cities that today, really seem like different urban areas, or whether it's completely rethinking the logistics and distribution network in terms of being able to do that. That's, I think, where we're at right now.
Right.
And we have that set of opportunities that are in front of us.
I think it's a really exciting time that we're in, right? Because the goods movement space is changing so dramatically, and the potential to do things differently is out there. I think that's actually a perfect segue to introduce Bastion from Postmates. And I think that one of the things that I'll throw in your direction now is, although some of the mechanisms underlying it may be more traditional than, say, vacuum tubes, the notion of on-demand delivery and what that means in like a fully digital age is something that's really transformative. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see as the future of delivery and how you see that continuing to evolve going forward.
I will only talk about Hyperloop because it took me 6 hours to get here from San Francisco. So this is true. I literally just arrived, and I think the plane was scheduled for 1 o'clock. So, Jay, all the best. Congrats on the new job. You know, heck of a deal you got. Hope they gave you some shares too, and I hope you get it done tomorrow. So, no, jokes aside, I do apologize for everybody who had to wait here, and then I show up with a silly hat. So, it makes it two of us. And at
I
least,
feel out. Like, nobody told me about this.
Hats?
So, I like the question, and at Postmates we believe that, you know, we're in an age where there should be no reason why all the goods that are available in your city, that are physically in stores, that you shouldn't have access to them in a couple of minutes. I believe it's a logical step from a great job that Amazon did with warehouses that are extremely close to cities. But we believe that there is actually a world where local retailers and local merchants can have a leg up when it comes to competing with Amazon. Maybe not on all levels, but definitely when it comes to the readily availability of goods in your city. And for many years, as a matter of fact, since we started Postmates, there has been this huge challenge that, believe it or not, local inventory is still relatively unknown to you as a customer. Most stores, if you want to know the inventory, you got to call them, or you got to walk in the store. So we used to call that local inventory is unlocked. That is obviously changing now. You know, you have a lot of direct consumer brands moving into the space. You have younger companies, you have new point of sale operating systems, and you have an infrastructure, not just like Postmates, but several companies like Postmates. We have 250,000 Postmates, it's what we call our couriers, delivering goods in the cities in this country. Just in LA last year, we did over $300 million in goods that we delivered locally. So from LA stores to people that live in LA or the greater LA area. And I believe that is a very interesting shift that is happening. That is happening today with an infrastructure that you mentioned is probably a lot more labor intense than Hyperloop and the future of transportation. But you know, we go through great lengths at Postmates, not with glass tubes, but with our own research lab to understand autonomous vehicles, to understand them on the streets, but also on the sidewalks, to explore how in the future, and this is what we believe in, to have this infrastructure that we're creating today available at almost zero cost to everybody who lives in a city. And I believe that is part of our vision. I'll stop here for a second because I've been chatting a long time.
No, I think that's great insight, and I think that it's something that actually resonates with my work as well at UPS, just in terms of how do you deliver in the last mile as efficiently as possible. And really to deploy new technology, oftentimes you run up against not only the internal barriers to innovation, but you also run up against external barriers, whether that be regulatory, government. And so looking to an environment that is increasingly, I think, not that it's contentious, but like people are starting to pick up on the notion that like delivery can cause congestion, or trucks are an issue, or
people have figured it out.
I agree.
The target is out there. So what do you think needs to change in that conversation, and how are each of your respective companies looking to engage with those stakeholders, and like sort of what do you think needs to happen there?
Let me take a shot. You know, I'll wear a different hat for a second. I didn't bring one with me, but I'll wear a different hat for a second, which is not really Hyperloop for a second, which is, I actually think we are really on the verge of reimagining the urban land use in the urban space. I think we've unbundled urban mobility, both on the passenger side and on the freight side, in a way that I don't think we could have even imagined a decade ago. And it's happening incredibly fast. You know, you walk down the corridor here, and what you're seeing and now are 20 different companies doing scooters and bikes and other things that and if we were talking about this 5 years ago, my old company would have been one of the only companies sitting there. This is changing incredibly rapidly to be able to do it. We have to respond. We know the explosion of on-demand delivery, Amazon and the like in our big cities to be able to do it. And we want the flexibility of being able to connect the retail environment, and all of that can't fit into urban areas without some real change that's going to take place. Putting my current hat on, what I would also argue, so I think that's going to happen, and I think it will happen, it should happen. I hope, this may not be your argument from UPS, but I hope it will include curbside pricing and the way we rethink our roadways and all parts of that. I hope it includes safe biking infrastructure and different ways of being able to do it. And I hope we're all creative, as I know UPS is being and Postmates is being, about the way in which we actually handle this outside of traditional automobiles and trucks to be able to do that. I think what also goes along with that is the ability to think about how are we moving low weight, high value goods, right? And so much of what's happening in urban centers or that, your example about Amazon before, I think Hyperloop really opens up the opportunity to have an incredibly efficient distribution network that's taking place in a way that we're not right now in being able to do it. And it takes some of the burdens off of our roads, and it allows us to concentrate on the last mile rather than actually thinking about how this is affecting us in every part in that channel in terms of being able to do that. I also think in the retail environment, imagine the ability for stores to be able to have real just-in-time that says, hey, even if there's something going on, we could have something change from morning to afternoon because it's so simple to be able to get it from the distribution network back into cities to be able to do it. And I think retail has to fight back in cities. I think this is part of what has to happen as well. So I think all of this is going to happen. I think there's a fundamental reshaping that's taking place right now. It's being enabled by some of what we see as the opportunities that are there. And it's being forced by the frustration that we have about other things that are going on.
Right. Well, I mean, even in my, and not to jump ahead of you, Bastian, before you answer the question as well, but it starts to even make me think about that even if you had a distribution center outside the city with Hyperloop, that you could get a local, they maybe didn't have it in stock, a certain size, but you could then still purchase that good from a local retailer because they were able to get that shipment in from their distribution center with Hyperloop in a way that they couldn't to the city center today, and then Postmates could fulfill the last mile or something like that.
Some great points from Jay. Let me try to answer this, and I touch on 3 areas very quickly, and I'll try to be brief. I think number one, not even the companies that are part of, driving more traffic into urban areas right now, I believe have really an honest interest to do so. And I give you an example why. It is often not the smartest thing to deliver, a half-pound burrito in a 2-ton car just because you crave that thing. And we discovered that a while ago. And not only is it not cost efficient, which is what a company like Postmates is interested in, but it also doesn't make sense on many other levels, from the environment to congestion. So very early on, we started looking into technologies that allow us to have more efficient routes. Just because you want something fast doesn't mean that we can't use some of the same efficiencies that you guys are using at FedEx or UPS. So what does it mean for us? It means that over 1/3 of all deliveries on the Postmates platform today are what we call batched or chained. And that means that a Postmate who picks up an order picks up more than one item, or we are interweaving Dropbox and pickups, even in a 30 to 45 minute delivery for hot food. That is one thing how we try to be more efficient, because very selfishly it helps us, but it also helps all the other causes that I just mentioned. I think number 2, I believe that cities have to do a lot more to change and adapt to new technologies that are coming, and they have to explore new modes of transportation, and they have to find a way to do that a lot faster than they used to do it. And I believe that they need to do that because they owe it to all of us as citizens. That is not the hat that I'm wearing as a CEO, since we're talking about hats, and you picked up that analogy nicely. But as a citizen, I would like to demand that cities explore new forms of transportation, because quite frankly, sitting on the status quo, trying to figure out a few more parking spots is not gonna do it any longer. And the car, in all of its greatness, and a beautiful American product is just not the best transportation method for all of us in urban areas in the future. That is a fact. And you know, we have some cities like LA, Mayor Garcetti, he's doing an amazing job at exploring new ways of transportation, exploring how you can design cities, how you can rethink. Think about San Francisco has parking spots, enough parking spots to cover the California coastline. The city of San Francisco. That's crazy, right? So these parking spots will hopefully become available when AV comes into the cities, when we find new forms of transportation, when a lot of our trips switch to scooters or other forms of transportation. There's beautiful things you can do with them. Extension of storefronts, they can be available, they can be public space, which we should not, in the cities that we live in today, you sometimes have the feeling public space becomes more and more scarce. The opposite should be true. It should be, you should create spaces that are worth living. So I think that is a second part that is extremely important, and that is something that cities can actively do. And third one, at Postmates, I mentioned it before, we do two things. We explore new forms of transportation as vehicles for the fleet, and we spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how we can create new vehicle classes that are not on the roads, but that operate on the sidewalks, and that can deliver goods, or that can augment the fleet. Because not only the last mile is really important when it comes to local commerce, the first mile is important too. That means if you're a local store and you want to sell goods, you need to be accessible in some sort of way. That doesn't necessarily mean with a car, but it means that you need to have the ability to sell from your premise easily, not just to foot traffic.
No, literally, I think it's stealing my talking points now at some point. When you talk about the first part of what you were saying, starts to remind me almost of like a game-changing shift in the transportation environment. And then, you know, that we had previously talked outside about sort of leapfrog technology that Hyperloop stands. And so both of those to me say that, like you said, Bastian, it's not just a few more parking spots or a few more loading zones. It's a pretty macro shift in thinking that, but then how do you, if it's such a big notion, like, well, we need to really innovate and push forward in goods movement and people movement, how do you actualize that? Or like, what's the tangible next steps then that flow out of it to enable Postmates to be delivering more efficiently on last mile, UPS to be delivering more efficiently on last mile, and for solutions like Hyperloop to actually take shape in real life?
So look, you know, I think you have to start by recognizing what's actually happening in urban areas all over the world, right? 50% of the world's population will be in cities by 2050. That's 30 years from now. We are fundamentally unequipped in the models that we have right now to be able to handle that level of urban activity without driving ourselves to a halt, right? So there's no question about that, right? So we cannot do what we are doing today, even if we do it a little bit better. And I think you made exactly that point. It's not about 3 parking spaces. There's not. We can't do it. We fail, right? I mean, we keel over in terms of doing that. I think what we have to be able to do is to be able to think about this in a wholly different way. Not the idea that an urban area is 8 ring roads and that we're trying to figure out how we're moving around it that way, but how we actually have transit-oriented development that is related to retail areas in terms of being able to do it, how we have city centers that are actually connected to each other, and that's the beauty of Hyperloop in terms of being able to think about that. And then what does that actually mean for goods movement as well, and thinking about this. I'll give you a US example, which I like a lot, which is a project that we've now studied with the state of Missouri, which is a Hyperloop between St. Louis and Kansas City. And why do I bring that up? Because actually what you do is you now make that pair right along I-70, one of the original sections of the interstate highway system in the US. You run right along that. It's now a 25-minute trip. Now imagine that distribution centers are set up with Hyperloop to be able to get into each of those cities now in 10 minutes or something like that. Imagine a new airport that's being built in between that's connected in the same way, that's providing a mega opportunity in terms of being able to do it. And imagine the ability to be able to move more goods by air easily in terms of doing it. And if you then connect that with a last mile thought process that says, hey, we can be a different type of city right now, you've changed the whole game. Within that, I think what you want to continue to do is two things, and you mentioned both of them, by the way, and you are completely right. One is we have to keep public space for public use, right? And we are sometimes forgetting that, and I feel very, very strongly about that. And the second is we have to continue to unlock innovation in the way that we're going to move things around, right? What's happened in the last decade in terms of doing this, which really is proving to us that we don't have to live our life around a 2-ton set of steel to be able to do that, should continue on steroids in the way that we're doing it. And some of the things that you're doing are exactly the right things to be able to do. But they're going to have to be connected, not just to what happens in the city, but actually how we think about this whole urban environment and how we think about the connectivity. We're going to have to reimagine the whole page.
So I wasn't convinced that the Hyperloop thing is going to work, but I think they did a fantastic job at getting you in there as CEO. No, I mean it. I mean, you have done a remarkable job in London, a remarkable job with the MTA in New York, even if brief, but you gave on-timeness and awareness and all of that to New York, so that was fantastic. No, I mean it. I love the things that you have done. Look, I'm not do a plug for any of the companies, but I think if you're working in a city, in public service, in departments that are exposed to companies like ours, here's two things. Take a step back. What needs to change, really specifically, we won't get there overnight, but that is that this country has to figure out how we can realize large infrastructure products again in a matter of years and not decades, period, right? We built the Golden Gate Bridge in 3 years, and we're still trying to figure out how to have a high-speed train going through all of California. We're trying to figure out how we can get a bus terminal to work in San Francisco, which is supposed to be the tech capital of the world. So, but saying that doesn't help anybody, right? Because it's just, you can read that in the Times and in the Post, and you can read it in your local newspaper. It's the great wish that we would all have, is if we could just go back to this glory age where we can build extremely difficult things super fast. That time may have passed forever. But if you are in a city and if you are working on these projects, I think one thing that I wish more citizens would demand is that you have to have open eyes and you have to have an open mind and you have to explore the things that are put in front of you. Because a lot of them are going to happen either way. Maybe when your legislative turn is over, maybe when the next mayor is going to come, maybe because a company is moving aggressive enough to make it happen. It would be a lot more fun and a lot smarter if it's done in a way where each sides reach across the aisle, where innovation is not blocked, where it's not exposed to the tidbits of how an inner city circle works on what should be done and what shouldn't be done. I believe there is a duty that public servants have that work in the cities to explore the broad spectrum of technologies, to do it fast, to do it in a way that is right and just, to run pilots like many great cities do, but many more great cities should do and should do faster. That, of course, also requires work, but that is, I believe, where if you have a mayoral office, if you're in that space, where I would invest talent, where I would invest infrastructure, where I would invest budgets to realize that, because the benefits from these technologies that will work and will work at scale can put such a competitive advantage to the cities that figure it out. I believe it's underrated, and I wish we would see more innovation there inside our elected representatives.
Right. When we have that sense of collaboration, I think you also are able to actually bring things to scale too. And so when you're talking about a pilot project, it's not just the one-off, but you're actually able to scale something and deliver real results. So.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, I think if, let's take U.S. context and international context, the rest of the world is not standing still while we are fumbling to be able to do this. We are based right here in LA, where we're 5 minutes away. The project that is the furthest along for us right now is in India. It's connecting Mumbai and Pune to be able to do it. We've been designated to be able to deliver this project now. My point about it is not, to talk so much about what we're doing there, but everywhere people are making choices and making decisions now about rethinking urban space because they have to, right? And I think we are truly at a point where the infrastructure and the ingenuity have to come together. We've somehow lost the ability to be able to do that, and it's got to come back.
Couldn't agree more. And with that, I just want to be sensitive to everybody's time. And I know that we're standing between everyone and drinks, but I want to thank our panelists for an engaging discussion. Just really appreciate your guys' thoughts on it.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kind words.
Sorry that I was so late.